Hi everyone, Charlie from Label Maker Studios here today. I want to do a response video to an article I read on Medium over the weekend. The article was posted back in 2016, but I received it over an email blast over the weekend, and so it must be something really important. And I have to admit, the title of the article did catch my attention. The article is titled, How a TV Sitcom Triggered the Downfall of Western Civilization. There is a subtitle, but I'm going to save that for the end because it's actually the one piece where I think the author of the article actually showed a little bit of clever wordplay. Article's written by David Hopkins. There's also a note at the end of the article that states, an earlier version of this article was shared as a spoken essay for Naked Stage in blank. The article states where it was, but I'm not going to repeat that over this video. And then published on D Magazine's Front Burner blog. I'll have a link to the medium.com version of the article in the description below if you want to read it for yourself. I'm just going to jump straight into the article. I want to discuss a popular TV show my wife and I have been binge watching on Netflix. It's the story of a family man, a man of science, a genius who fell in with the wrong crowd. He slowly descends into madness and desperation led by his own egotism. With one mishap after another, he becomes a monster. I'm talking, of course, about Friends and its tragic hero, Ross Geller. Oh, don't worry, this gets better. You may see it as a comedy, but I cannot laugh with you. To me, Friends signals a harsh embrace of anti-intellectualism in America, where a gifted and intelligent man is persecuted by his idiot compatriots. And even if you see it from my point of view, it doesn't matter. The constant barrage of laughter from the live studio audience will remind us that our own reactions are unnecessary, redundant. The theme song itself is filled with foreboding, telling us that life is inherently deceptive. Career pursuits are laughable, poverty is right around the corner, and oh yeah, your love life's DOA. But you will always have the company of idiots. They will be there for you. Don't I feel better? Mr. Hopkins' synopsis of the theme song from Friends pretty well foreshadows his overall shallow understanding and interpretation of the show in general. The theme song tells us that life is inherently deceptive, career pursuits are laughable, poverty is around the corner. The point of this song is to show that even when you're having a bad day, week, month, or year, straight from the theme, your friends are there for you. It's actually an uplifting song. It's about the fact that your friends are going to have your back, not that they're idiots dragging you down. Now, you still might make the argument that the show portrays a group of idiots dragging someone down, and we'll read the rest here to see what he says, but trying to take the theme song as in support of that conclusion, I don't buy it. Doesn't make sense. Friends was the Thursday night primetime must-see TV event that featured the most likable ensemble ever, assembled by a casting agent. All young, all middle class, all white, all straight, all attractive but approachable. First off, he does a pretty severe bait and switch there. He starts by talking about the likable ensemble assembled by a casting agent. That leads you to believe he's about to talk about the actors and actresses themselves, and then he goes on to describe the characters from the show. Not an argument, really. All young, all middle class, all white, all straight, all attractive. I mean, really, this is a non sequitur. It doesn't contribute to his argument. I think it's really just blatant pandering to the SJW crowd, but let's move on. All morally and politically bland. Now, the morally bland, I'll actually give him that one. That's probably the main valid criticism, I would say, as a fan of the show Friends. That's probably the most valid criticism you could make of the story and the characters in general. Morally bland. I would sign off on that. Politically bland. I don't think you can really say the characters were politically bland. I think the show was just non-political, which most television prior to the, late 2000s was pretty non-political. That's not odd. That's not unusual. Really, most people want their television to be a break from politics. They want an escape from the realities and the insanities of our political life. So I think that's actually, I guess I have to agree, he's right, politically bland, but it's not a negative. And all equipped with easily digestible personas. Joey is the goofball, Chandler is the sarcastic one, Monica is obsessive compulsive, Phoebe is the hippie, Rachel, hell, I don't know, Rachel likes to shop. Then there was Ross. Ross was the intellectual and the romantic. Any character from TV, movie, book, short story can be compressed into a one-sentence summary of their character. That doesn't mean there aren't other parts to the characters. To take two examples from the show in question, let's look at Monica and Chandler. Actually, let's look at Chandler and Rachel. Chandler starts the show as an accountant and pretty much perpetually afraid of women and afraid of commitment. By the end of the show, he has abandoned his accountant career, started a new career in marketing from scratch, and is fairly successful by the story of the show, and is married to Monica and starting his life with her, raising their adopted children. That's a pretty significant story arc. You can't say that there's not a level of depth to the character. And then Rachel, the one who likes to shop. If I remember correctly, the beginning of this show had her running away from her fiancé at the altar, moving in with some friends with no money and nothing, starting a career as a waitress in a coffee house, and eventually being at the point where she is a successful businesswoman in a fashion company, actually being pursued by multiple fashion companies that want to hire her as upper-level executive. Again, there's a lot of story arc here. There's a lot of character development that is being essentially washed over. And I would like to add that Ross is probably one of the most stagnant characters in this show. Ross, Joey, and Phoebe are probably the ones that change the least, and I think Ross is the absolute least. If you look at his character, he is making the same mistakes in judgment at the end of this series as he was making at the beginning. I'm not going to go into great depth there. You can research the series if you want, but I would say Ross is the most stagnant, despite going back to the intro here. The author describes Ross as slowly descending into madness and desperation led by his own egotism. With one mishap after another, he becomes a monster. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I think Ross's personality and character was stagnant throughout the entire show. He developed very little throughout. Let's go on. Eventually, the Friends audience, roughly 52.5 million people, turned on Ross. No, most people hated him from the very beginning because he was whiny and annoying from the very first episode. But the characters of the show were pitted against him from the beginning. Consider episode 1, when the Joey says of Ross, "This guy says hello, I want to kill myself." This actually makes my point. He was whiny and annoying from the very first episode. The reason Joey says that is because Ross is going through his painful divorce, he's depressed, and you can hear that in his voice, in the way he says, "Hello." And Joey is picking up on this. I might add, Joey and the rest of the Friends cast are still Ross's friends, despite the fact that he's whiny and annoying. Again, let's move on. In fact, anytime Ross would say anything about his interests, his studies, his ideas, whenever he was mid-sentence, one of his friends was sure to groan and say how boring Ross was, how stupid it is to be smart, and that nobody cares. Cue the laughter of the live studio audience. This gag went on pretty much every episode for 10 seasons. Can you blame Ross for going crazy? That definitely happened sometimes, but it wasn't nearly as big a part of the show as this guy's trying to make. And like a Greek tragedy, our hero is caught in a prophecy that cannot be avoided. The show's producers, akin to the immutable voice of the gods, declared that Ross must end up with Rachel, the one who shops. Honestly, I think he could have done better. Honestly, I think she could have done better. The show ended in 2004, the same year that Facebook began, the year that George W. Bush was re-elected to a second term, the year that reality television became a dominant force in pop culture, with American Idol starting an 8-year reign of terror as the #1 show in the U.S., the same year that Paris Hilton started her own lifestyle brand and released an autobiography, and Joey Tribbiani got a spin-off TV show. The year 2004 was when we completely gave up and embraced stupidity as a value. Just ask Green Day. Their album, American Idiot, was released in 2004, and it won the Grammy for Best Rock Album. You can't get more timely. I'm sorry, but a Canadian band writing a rock album that makes fun of the United States is not where I get my political and social commentary. Green Day can go pound sand. Just because they wrote an album, American Idiot, doesn't make it true. The rejection of Ross marked the moment when much of America groaned mid-sentence at the voice of reason. So 2004 was the rejection of Ross. The conclusion of the show Friends was the rejection of Ross. The finale that saw him finally getting the girl at the end, Rachel, the object of his passion and desire for the entire 10-year run of the show, finally moving on to the next stage of his life, starting his life and finally as a family man. Actually, I'd like to go back to that. In the introduction, the author says, "This is the story of a family man." I'm sorry, he wasn't a family man throughout any portion of the 10 years of the show. And the finale actually marks the moment where he becomes a family man. And he starts a family with his hopefully soon-to-be wife, Rachel, and their daughter that they are ostensibly going to start raising together. If anything, the end of this show was actually the acceptance of Ross, not his rejection. Yes, my theory is that Friends may have triggered the downfall of Western civilization. You might think I'm crazy, but to quote Ross, "Oh, am I? Am I? Am I out of my mind? Am I losing my senses?" Did you know the song that originally accompanied the Friends pilot episode was R.E.M's "It's the End of the World as We Know It"? A blissful song with an apocalyptic message that goes largely ignored. That's cute, but it's not an argument. This is where the article gets good, though. This is where he tries to make the analogy between Friends and the real world. And this is where this article completely breaks down. I was a teacher in 2004. I coached our school's chess club. I saw how my students were picked on, bullied. I tried my best to defend them, but I couldn't be everywhere. My students were smart, huge nerds, and they were in hostile, unfriendly territory. Other students would be waiting outside my room to ambush the chess club members who met in my room every day at lunch. During my tenure as teacher, I gained the reputation of being a slayer of bullies and defender of nerds. I promise you, bullies can be mean, but they knew Mr. Hopkins was much worse. So, your tactic in defending your nerds, which I don't take as a derogatory term. I think nerds should be proud of who and what they are. I say that as a avowed nerd with a mechanical engineering degree. Your tactic in defending them was to fight off the bullies for them instead of teaching them to defend themselves, teaching them to be competent, take care of their own lives, take authority for their own lives. I would like to point out the fact that you probably destined them to a life of being perpetually bullied because you didn't teach them how to deal with bullies. So they sit there thinking, oh, well, someone's going to come and save me. Someone's going to come and protect me because Mr. Hopkins was there. Obviously, there's always going to be someone there to protect me. And instead of learning to defend themselves, they're just going to sit there and take it forever and ever and ever. Not to mention, you probably made their bullying back in high school worse because these bullies didn't go away. They just waited till you weren't there and picked on those kids even more, even worse, even more viciously. So, good job. Great strategy. Bullies can be mean, but they knew Mr. Hopkins was much worse. Oh, so you're king bully. Again, great. I love this strategy. I love the way we're looking at the world here. Maybe intellectuals have always been persecuted and shoved in lockers, but something in my gut tells me we're at a low point, where social media interaction has replaced genuine debate and political discourse, where politicians are judged by whether we'd want to have a beer with them, where scientific consensus is rejected, where scientific research is underfunded, where journalism is drowning in celebrity gossip. I see Kim Kardashian's ass at the top of CNN.com, and I am scared. I don't particularly care that Kim Kardashian's ass is at the top of CNN.com either. I think that probably is indicator of the failure of, or at least one of the failures of our civilization, but take a breath, dude. The gears are still turning, okay? It's all right. But something in my gut tells me we're at a low point. Okay, I'm glad your gut tells us we're at a low point, but again, that's not an argument. That's not evidence. That's not proof. Scientific consensus is rejected. I mean, I don't know what he's talking about here. I could think of probably 4 or 5 issues that may have been in his mind when he wrote this. I have no intention of responding to that. Where scientific research is underfunded, I don't know what scientific research you're talking about. There's plenty of funding for scientific research. There's a little bit less national funding these days, but I think that's good. I think scientific research should be privately funded. It's a better system. Maybe it's all harmless fun, like the good-spirited laughter of a live studio audience, maybe. But I am sincerely worried we have not done enough to cultivate intellectual curiosity within our culture. Fortunately, there's a resistance forming. People with grit who aren't afraid to begin a sentence with, "Did you know?" These are the Rosses of the world. I saw them in my chess club, and I see them in my city, hiding at the art museum, crouching in used bookstores, exchanging sideways glances at the public libraries and coffee houses, and sneaking around at our schools, community colleges, and universities. I'm just curious why they're hiding, crouching, exchanging sideways glances, and sneaking around. Is that maybe because they had teachers like you who taught them that someone would protect them, so they need to just stay out of the light until their savior comes to protect them, as opposed to learning to stand up for themselves? Also, who sneaks around at schools, community colleges, and universities? What kind of creeps are these that you raised and that you're protecting here? There was no hope for Ross. He went insane, and yeah, he did get annoying. No, he was always annoying from the very beginning. So how do we retain our sanity in a dumb, dumb world? I wouldn't be a good teacher if I didn't come prepared with a few ideas. This is going to be good. Number 1, read a fucking book. I didn't editorialize that. That is exactly what's on the paper. Number 1, read a fucking book. So our author is making a claim about the rejection of intellectualism, the accepting of anti-intellectualism. And the way he emphasizes his major points is by adding 4-letter swear words into them. Sounds like resentment to me. And I don't know about you, but I don't generally listen to someone with an excess amount of resentment in their life, enough that they have to punctuate their major points with these kinds of swear words. And I'm not a prude. I don't have a problem with swearing, but you're undercutting your point by getting so wound up and defensive about this. Something special happens when you set aside the inane distractions of modern culture and immerse yourself in a novel. You open yourself up to new ideas, new experiences, new perspective. It's an experiment in patience and mindfulness. I actually agree. I think he's right here. I think that reading a book is a great way to do all of those things. With that said, there are plenty of other ways that people can conduct experiments in patience and mindfulness. There are other ways that people can open themselves to new ideas, new experiences, and perspectives. So sure, reading a book is one way to do it, but there's plenty of other ways. The New School for Social Research in New York proved that reading literature improves empathy. It's true. I would like to point out that there is no footnote, there is no hyperlink, there is no reference to the study in question in his article. But he tells us it's true, so we're supposed to take it at face value. I did find the article in question. It was published in Science Magazine. I will include a link in the description below. It does generally support the conclusion that he made here, although I think the authors of that study would take issue with his statement that their research proved reading literature improves empathy. I think they would probably say something more like suggested or points to, because one of their major findings was that a lot more research needs to be done to understand how these cognitive abilities develop and how they're supported by reading literature or other information. So again, the link to that will be in the description below. Please look at that. Look at that study yourself. It actually was pretty interesting. It was pretty enlightening. Reading makes you less of a jerk, so read often. Read difficult books. Read controversial books. Read a book that makes you cry. Read something fun, but read. Again, I agree. I don't disagree with him here. Number 2, learn something. Your brain is capable of so much. Feed it. Learn something new. The greatest threat to progress is the belief that something is too complex to fix. Poverty is permanent. Racism will always exist. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is too difficult to understand. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not too difficult to understand. There's a group of people, mainly the Palestinians that support Hamas and similar terrorist organizations, that want to eradicate the Jews and wipe Israel off the face of the earth. The Israelis merely want to live and let live. They want to survive. They're merely not rolling over and letting their enemies kill and eradicate them. That's pretty much it. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. There's a whole lot more history that goes into that, but that's what it boils down to. Not difficult to understand. The public education system is broken. Educate yourself so you can be part of the conversation. Learn something scientific, something mathematic. Explore philosophy. Study paleontology. I'm not sure how paleontology saves the world, but I guess since this article is about Ross from Friends, you kind of got to put a nod that way. Try to learn a language. You don't even have to make fluency your goal. Just get a few more words in your head. Listen to an educational podcast. Professors from colleges are offering their lectures online for free. Think of what you could learn. One of my greatest challenges as a teacher was convincing students they were smart after someone had told them they were dumb. Again, I really like this suggestion. I don't think he's wrong. But if he's talking to the bully crowd, the crowd of people that become bullies, I don't think any of this is going to hit home with them. They don't care about the things that he's talking about. He's talking to his nerds who already agree with him, already believe what he's saying. He's not talking to someone, he's not convincing someone who isn't already interested in reading books or learning things. He's preaching to the choir. Number 3, stop buying so much shit. Again, making our point with anger and resentment. I turn off, even if what you're saying is right. This may seem like a non sequitur, but I'm convinced consumer culture and idiot culture are closely linked. Simplify your life. Idiocy dominates our cultural landscape because it sells more Nike tennis shoes and Big Macs. I'm sorry, Big Macs are part of consumer culture? That doesn't make any sense. Big Macs are food. We need food to survive. Granted, there are more nutritional options out there, but we need to eat something. So calling Big Macs part of consumer culture, I'm sorry, you're losing me there. When we thoughtfully consider what we bring into our home, we are less likely to be manipulated by empty impulses. Absolutely agreed. So let's modify suggestion number 3 to thoughtfully consider the shit we buy. I can sign off on that, but just stop buying so much shit. It's not specific enough. It's not really helpful to anyone. Thoughtfully consider the shit we buy. I kind of like that. It has a good ring to it, despite the 4-letter word. And finally, protect the nerds. A computer programmer from Seattle is doing more to alleviate world poverty, hunger, and disease through the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation than any other person in America right now. Nerds create vaccines. Nerds engineer bridges and roadways. Nerds become teachers and librarians. We need those obnoxiously smart people because they make the world a better place. We need smart people. We don't need obnoxious people. Those two don't go hand in hand. You can teach a smart nerd to be smart and not obnoxious. That's a lesson I had to learn the hard way when I was younger, and something that you should have taught your nerds when they were growing up. We can't have them cowering before a society that rolls their eyes at every word they say. Ross needs better friends. So I'm really not exactly sure what his connection between Friends and our current state, the current state of our society was. Is he trying to say that the Friends gang was a group of bullies that were bullying Ross throughout the whole run of the show? I mean, if your argument is that they were ultimately a bad influence on him, okay, I don't agree, but I can see where you're going with that. But if you're trying to say they were actively bullying him, it doesn't make sense. But then what you're talking about with the downfall of Western civilization, you're talking about bullies picking on nerds. So the two don't mix. So one, he made outlandish claims about his interpretation of the series Friends, which were wrong. And then he analogized that to the situation in the real world, which the analogy doesn't make sense, even if his initial interpretation was right. And then, I would argue most of what he said about the real world was more or less correct. I don't think it's particularly different now than it was, say, 10, 20, or even 30 or 40 years ago. I think nerds and geeks have been getting picked on for probably centuries, perhaps millennia. Not really sure what else to say about that. But, like I said, the article as well as the study that he referenced will be in the description below. Please send me your comments. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Please mention it to your friends. Share it with your social networks. I'd like to hear what you think. I realize this is kind of a silly topic. We're talking about Friends and how does it relate to the real world, but it really caught my attention. I want to leave on a positive note. Like I said, there was actually one thing in this article that I thought was clever, and I appreciated and I enjoyed as a fan of Friends. His subtitle. So the title of the article, one more time: How a TV Sitcom Triggered the Downfall of Western Civilization. And the subtitle: The One Where We Retain Our Sanity in a Stupid World. And if you're a fan of Friends, I think you'll probably appreciate that much like I did. If you're not a fan of Friends, each episode is titled starting with the one where, the one when, the one with, and then the rest of the title. So his use of the Friends naming convention, I thought that was clever and entertaining. With that, I'll call this a wrap. Thanks for watching. Keep your stick on the ice.